Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith.
Well, you have one life, and you might as well go for it, because what are you going to hold on to?
While many professing Christians have big hearts, few have the steel spine of our guest today, David Eubank. David is the focus of the 2020 documentary Free Burma Rangers, the founder and the leader of the group by the same name. The Free Burma Rangers are a multi-ethnic relief organization that operates on the front lines of some of the hottest combat zones. They provide critical medical aid and assistance to the victims of some of the most brutal war zones in the world. When most flee from the sound of gunfire, David and his Rangers run toward it. As America becomes increasingly soft with the talk of safe spaces and trigger warnings, I think you'll be inspired to hear that there are people doing the hard work of fighting real injustice around the world. Today I'll talk with Dave about the cruel 70-year civil war in Burma and his work there, his run-ins with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, the millions of dollars the U.S. has given Syria and where it's gone, and how we need to rethink our idea of a Christian soldier when it comes to protecting those in need.
Of Iraq, and these are all refugees that have been fleeing ISIS.
David Eubank, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so honored to have you on the show today. My wife and I just watched the documentary just a couple days ago. I've watched it twice since then, and you're doing some amazing work. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Reed, and it is an honor, and I'm blessed, and thanks for praying for us, too.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are doing some amazing work. I mean, I turned to my wife after watching that documentary, and I was like, this guy is an action star. Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise has got nothing on this guy. And I have to be honest, it's almost unfortunate that we praise actors and athletes so much in America as we do, because the reality is you are a true action hero. So again, I'm really, really honored to be speaking with you, but I do got to ask a question starting off with that before we jump into what you're doing in Burma and around the world. And I was reading something the other day, so I was wondering if you could confirm it for me and then kind of get some details. So I heard that actually you provided some intel for Sylvester Stallone and his crew for Rambo 4. Is that right?
We gave them footage. And so if you look at the first opening scenes in Rambo 4, he's got footage from different people, but most of it's ours. There are scenes of people running away from the Burma army and villages burning, and that's our footage, which we gave to them free. And they were going to try to buy it. I said, no, we don't sell anything. You can have it for free as long as you say this footage provided for the good of the people of Burma. So that was our only small part in that movie.
Yeah, that's amazing. So did you get to meet Sly?
Never have. I talked to him on the phone. I was in Burma most of that time, and I talked to him on satellite phone twice, and that was it.
Okay.
I invited him into Burma, though, and he's still welcome. If you want, I said, we'll carry a ruck for you, or you can carry your own ruck, or you can ride on a horse, but he's always welcome.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. Okay, so now to the good stuff. So I know that there's probably people in my audience that are not familiar with exactly who you are and what Free Burma Rangers is doing in Burma specifically and then around the world. So I was just wondering if you could give us just a little bit of background before we jump into kind of what's going on presently. Tell us how you guys got started and what it is that you do in Burma.
Well, I actually was born in Fort Worth, Texas, but then when I was 9 months old, my mom and dad, who were missionaries, moved to Thailand. So I grew up there. And then I came back to university in America, Texas A&M, commissioned as an Army officer, did that for 10 years in the Rangers and Special Forces, and then felt God's call to get out, and I started seminary. Right in that time, I got a call via my dad, who was still in Thailand, from a tribe in Burma, which is right next to Thailand, saying, please come and help us. And Burma is a 70-year running civil war right now. Mm-hmm. So back in 1993, I'd also just met my wife, Karen. We got married in Malibu on the beach, and then 3 days later, flew over to a neighboring country and then went extra legally into Burma, into one of these tribal areas. And that's how we got started. And as we were there and we were in the middle of this war, we prayed, God, what should we do? And we felt that he wanted us there to help people and to put a light on what's happening. So the main mission of the Free Burma Rangers, we came up with that name, is to help people and put a light on. And my personal mission is to be an ambassador for Jesus and share his love in deed and word, however he leads me. But the Free Burma Rangers is open to people of any or no religion. We have Buddhists, atheists, agnostic, Muslims. Anybody can join us, but the criteria is just three things. You got to do this for love because the team members are not paid. They're all volunteers. You can't run if people can't run.
Mm-hmm.
That's physical and moral courage. Now, if they're running, you can run. And then literacy in any language, because to make good reports and do medicine, you need some literacy. That's it. So we have people from different ethnicities, different skin colors, different races, different languages, different religions, all together, bound together by love.
Yeah.
Myself, I'm trying to follow Jesus, and most of our leadership are Christian, but anybody's welcome, whether that's in Burma. We have 100 teams right now in the conflict areas of Burma. We have a team in Syria and a team in Iraq and Kurdistan.
Okay, and what do those conflicts look like specifically in Burma? We'll get maybe to kind of some of the others in a minute, but what is it the aid that you're providing, and what is going on in Burma in that 70 years, which you said? I think this is just an amazing thing for people to realize, because people don't even know probably that this is going on. And of course, it's a big world, so there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't realize, but it's amazing that 70-year civil war has been going on in Burma. So what kind of things are you guys seeing when you go in and offer relief and aid?
Well, Burma, which is also called Myanmar, it sits in between India and Thailand, and then China's right above it. This war has been going on 70 years, which is the longest running civil war active in the world right now. And what it looks like is you have the army from the majority Burman groups that oppress their own people in Burma too. They don't just oppress the ethnics, but they attack the ethnic minorities. Now, Burma is about 40% to 50% small ethnic groups, and then about 40 to 50% Burmans. So it's almost split in half. And historically, the Burma kings controlled the central valleys of Burma, and the ethnics lived in the mountains. When the British took over Burma as a colony in the 1800s, they took over the whole country, and the Burmans didn't like it, of course, because this foreign power was there, but the ethnics did, because the ethnics felt they were fairly treated by the British for the first time. When World War II rolled around, the Burmans joined the Japanese to fight the British and the Americans for their freedom, but the ethnics joined the Allies for their freedom. After World War II, England stepped away from Burma. Burma got independence, and right away, the Burman majority attacked the ethnic groups. And that war has been going on ever since. And so what it looks like is Burma is a mountainous country along the borders, and the central area is generally rice fields, very rich in natural resources, rice, water, hydro, timber, gold, jade. And it's a country about the size of Texas. So right now, the Burmans control most of the central valleys, and there's roads there now, and tanks and aircraft. But in the mountains, the ethnics still control a lot of the mountains, because a lot of places there's no roads. And it's like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone fighting for their villages.
Yeah.
And so the Burma army in their attacks have displaced over 1 million people internally. That's people moving around still inside Burma, and millions more have fled to neighboring countries. Most recently, the Burma army made a concerted effort to attack the Rohingya, which are a Muslim minority in southwest Burma. They've driven a total of 1 million people into Bangladesh. And then the Arakan, who are Buddhists, another minority group, there's over 100,000 of those internally displaced right now. Over 100,000 Kachin tribesmen displaced in the northern part of Burma, and also displacement along the east side. In some areas, there's now ceasefires, but it's very tenuous because the government is run finally by the military. So the conflict goes on. And our role is to be in the middle of that conflict and try to give love and give any kind of humanitarian help we can, shine a light, and pray.
Yeah. Well, I would say you're doing that and more, offering them faith and hope Man, because people can live a long time without food, probably about 30, 40 days or so, a couple days without water and such, and only a couple minutes or so without air. But man, I just think you can probably live, but your spirit will die without hope. And you guys are there shining a light on their story when they feel like there's absolutely nobody that's watching them or caring about them, to let them know that not only you guys care about them, but there's a God in heaven that cares about them and is watching them and with them every step along the way, even in their darkest hours. So I think that's so amazing that you guys are doing that. So now, so I don't forget to say this. I just want to say you need to, those who are listening to this need to check or watching, need to check out Free Burma Rangers, the documentary that you guys made, because it really does go into some detail about what it is that you guys are doing and how you're helping people. Because, I mean, you guys are there on the front lines as guns are being fired off, people are being shot at. You're helping people who have gunshot wounds, offering medical relief and medical aid and all sorts of other things. So so it's really, really awesome what you're doing there. And you're saving lives in the most literal sense that you could possibly think of. So with that being said, so you're also training up local people to offer relief. So what does that training look like? You see a little bit of it in the documentary. It's kind of military style. You've got a background in military as a ranger. But what kind of training are you taking those local Burmese and then perhaps in other countries too? What does that training look like for Free Burma Rangers?
Before I answer that, I wanted to pick up on something you just said about reminding people that God loves them.
Yeah.
We all need to be reminded that when evidently around us, we don't think God or anyone maybe loves us.
Yeah.
And we feel hopeless, whether it's because of our mistake and sin or someone else's, or things just aren't working. And to remind each other that Jesus loves you, call on his name. He is the supernatural power to help you and change your heart and help you navigate into any environment. And I think that's the most important thing we do, is to testify to the reality of the living God who sent his son Jesus to be present with us and save us right now and save us in the hereafter. Yeah. So that's the most important thing that I believe that we can do. And I need it too. We're here in a quarantine and we're now extended and having to take more tests. And I felt fearful and sad and worried. And this morning I called a friend of mine, Victor Marks, who has a ministry, and he prayed for me and the load lifted. I thought, wow, I hate being a weenie, but I am one. And so we need God's help and we need each other. And God put us on this world together for that. Yeah. And when Jesus is around, it's not just philosophy, it's supernatural power. So that's the main thing we do. And in terms of training teams, we start also with spiritual training. And we don't, again, anybody can join us. We don't tell them what to believe, but we ask them questions. Who do you serve? Who is your God, if you have one? And then talk about that. And then we give our own testimony, who Jesus is to us. And we start every morning with, we start every morning about 4 or 5 in the morning, depends, with exercise. They're running around just like in the army, bam, 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 boom, and obstacle course and long distance runs and push-ups. And then after they clean up, they go to breakfast. And then we have a formation. It's like being in the army. And then because we're in a war zone and you need to be inured to shooting and fighting and quick commands. And we also then start the class with devotions. And you don't have to believe in anything, but you're there for devotions, to pray, to listen to different ideas, and for me to worship God. And then after devotions, we train. And there's over 30 subjects. We have first aid, dentistry, land navigation, map reading, map making, rappelling, swimming, life-saving, videography, photography, report writing, interviewing, mule packing, and many other subjects that we teach the Rangers to do in a 3-month period. It's about every week or 2 weeks, they have a field training exercise, but there's a simulated mission, and they go out, no food, as fast as they can, different stations where they're tested on what they've been learning in a realistic environment. So that when they graduate, they can go into a conflict area and help the people who are under attack and have real skills to do that with. We also have a medical school called the Jungle School of Medicine, co-located in our camp in Burma, where we train medics in the year-long program so they can provide a higher quality of care.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I want to pick up on something you just said because I think this is important to say because not everybody that will be watching or listening today will be a Christian. And I have a kind of another thought that I want to kind of dovetail with this. But before we do that, I just want to say this, that I think your approach to your faith and what you do there is so good and so right on, because here's the thing, for somebody who's not a Christian, they may say, well, why does this have to be a Christian thing? Why is this not just a humanitarian thing? I think the reality is we certainly believe this, and I hope even if you're not a Christian, you could see this as well, that it would be wrong not to offer people something that we feel is of such great value in some of the darkest and most hurtful moments of their life. And what I would call an existential anchor, an anchor for their soul, something that they can put their hope in and their strength in when they're going through difficulties. It's sometimes hard for Americans to really wrap our head around this because we've never been through the things that some of the people that you're working with and helping have really gone through. And I know you've seen this. People's lives just absolutely turn around. I mean, we can speak to that fact of ourselves, that our lives have just been absolutely revolutionized by the hope that is found in Christ. And so I do think that while we don't often, or at least some don't often see that as part of humanitarian aid, you have to realize the benefits in the darkest moments of your life for the hope that can be found by putting your faith in something bigger than yourself when all hell is breaking loose all around you. I think that's so important, and I love the way that you approach that, because you're not making it mandatory, but you are offering it as a source of hope and inspiration for people who desperately need it. So with that being said, I want to ask you a question about that. And this is probably one of the most important questions that I'll ask today, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. My grandfather was a veteran, and he was an Army Ranger as well. He went to the Korean War and fought there. And much later in his life, I had a conversation with him about that, and he became essentially, I don't know if you would consider him a pacifist or not, but he didn't like the idea of going into foreign lands and the U.S. military being a part of those foreign activities. And this is the question that I asked him at that time. This is a long time ago, but by the way, I guess I haven't developed much because this still makes sense to me today. I said, yeah, but Grandpa, if there was a neighbor right next door, now let's just say a woman that needed help and she was screaming for help, if you sat here and said, well, that's not my business, you would be unjust. That would be evil of you not to go and offer aid and offer help. And so I still see, just kind of in a broader sense, I see, and sometimes we get it wrong. I see not that we're the world's police, but that we do have a responsibility to help those in need. Now, I'm wondering, with what you do, and I'm assuming that the vast majority of it, if it does happen, would come from Americans, if you have seen anybody criticize the fact that an American is going and interfering in foreign affairs as tense and as real as the things are that are going on in Burma. And just to give you another kind of example of this, where I have seen it in the past, John Chow was a young man who was a missionary. I believe he's from ORU. John Chow went to the Sentinelese, and when he was there, he tried to make contact with them a couple times, and eventually tried to make contact one last final time before he was killed. And there was a bunch of people in America that really had an issue with this and said, these people have been untouched by American influence, and they should be left alone. And there's many, many reasons for that, and I don't want to dig into that, but I saw some people who were Christians who were even responding to the death of this man, and they said things like he deserved to die for messing with these people that were, or interfering with these people who were not interfering with anybody else, who had not been touched by the ever-evolving world, and that he had no right to go and to interact with those people. And I just thought to myself, first of all, stop the train for a second. You're a Christian. Second of all, this is somebody's son. If it was your son or your brother or something like that, would you really say that he deserved to die for going to try to talk to these people and share with them the good news of Christ? I don't think so. Even if you weren't a Christian, that's a horrible thing to say about somebody. But it paints this picture that even today, increasingly in the church, we're adopting these ideas of neo-colonialism, and we're forgetting what it truly means to be a missionary. So I'm just wondering if you have experienced any kickback or any negativity with what you're doing in Burma and in other places.
So we have never got complaints from the people we're trying to serve. And I remember when in Burma, we have animists, Buddhists, all kinds of tribal people believing different things. They're just glad you're there.
Yeah.
They're glad you're there. And because we go with something they need, whether it's food or medicine or just remind them they're loved. The same in Iraq. I remember when I was first in Kurdistan, northern Iraq, after meeting with some Kurdish generals, I just felt God tell me, pray. And I started to pray, but then I felt God say, get on your knees. I was like, get on my knees. They're gonna think I'm just a Christian nutcase, you know? And but I knew that was God. I got on my knees and I prayed in English for these people and for our mission to them. And I got up off my knees, wondering what they thought of me. And this Kurdish general grabbed my hand and through the translator said, we don't know what you said, but we saw that you respect God like we do. We Muslims believe in God. We didn't know Americans still believed in God. We trust you. You can go anywhere you want in our country. And then when our family, because my family goes everywhere with me, people say, oh, you brought your kids? You must think Christians and Muslims are Americans and Iraqis are the same value. Oh, you brought your kids in Sudan. You must not want anything from us. Oh, you brought your kids? We have kids. That means we still are the same as you. We still count for something. And so I think when you go in love, and with us, we go as a whole family, people are not intimidated by us, and they may not agree with what we believe in, but they're glad we're there. And I remember in Iraq, again, I gave out the Jesus film. We gave out food. I said, anybody wants a Jesus film, you can have it. This guy grabbed me and goes, he kissed it because we need Jesus. We need his love here. This was in the Battle of Mosul. So among my own team, we have mostly Christians. 90% of our teams are Christian. Foreigners, I should say. 90% of our foreigners are Christians. About 80% of the teams are Christian. But we have an atheist on my team still. And he was an ex-Marine and wounded 4 times in the Battle of Fallujah before, joined us. And I remember once he was asking me, he said, Dave, you don't really trust me, do you? I said, why? He said, because I don't believe in God and you do. I said, no, the question is, do you trust me? Because I talk to the invisible God with invisible radio. And I make my decisions based on what he says, almost never alone. I discuss it with everybody, we pray together, but I believe in this God that talks to us. I said, if you can trust me to lead that way, of course I trust you. And later on in the Battle of Mosul, twice he risked his life to help save me under fire. And I said, Justin, you may not believe in God, but you believe in love, because greater love hath no man than this, he laid down his life for his friends. And you just did this for me, for love. And God is love. And so we'd never had those complaints from anybody we're serving. In fact, I remember in the Battle of Mosul with the Iraqi army, we had one particularly bad night where some people retreated and we did not. And we stayed with the Iraqi army. And it was a bad situation. And we all could have died. And the next morning, the Iraqi battalion commander came to me, Muslim, and he said, thank you for staying. This is the first night I slept well in 2 weeks of fighting because I knew you were with us. And I knew we counted. We feel like the world's trash. But because you're willing to come and die with us, we're not trash. We count for something. And so I'd have other Iraqi commanders say, you know, Dave, when you're gone and you don't pray with us, we don't feel as good. And finally, at the end of the Battle of Mosul, one of my favorite Iraqi generals, General Mustafa, said, when you came as an answer to prayer, I asked God, why'd you send this guy? He's the worst. He's an American Christian. Those are the worst. And we became brothers. And he said, thank you for showing us what it means to follow Jesus.
Wow.
So what I feel is when people are in crisis and you go to help out of love and you're here to serve them, not with your agenda, but with God's agenda and their agenda. And I go anywhere I go, I say, I have 10 horses in Burma. I've got medicine for 1,000 people. I've got 4 medics. I've got this. I've got that. They're all yours. Tell us how to use them. They're not mine. They're yours. in the Battle of Mosul, I got 4 armored vehicles, 3 ambulances, my family, 4 doctors, this much medicine, this much cash. It's yours. How can we work together?
Wow.
When you do that and share the dangers with the people and admit when you're wrong, I think we've never had a problem.
Yeah.
Except, ISIS trying to kill you or other people trying to kill you. Other than that, the people who win, they like us. And
Everything's great except for the people trying to kill you. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And so I think there's this, perhaps some of the things that undergirds that is just this disassociation that we have with people who are in different countries. Because the reality is that if we brought it home like I did for my grandpa in that story, we know in our heart of hearts that that non-action is not a response that we can take to people who are in need, people who need help. So I love what Sam Childer said, and I don't know if you know who he is, but some people who were questioning what he was doing with taking insurgents into areas, which is not even really what you do, but him taking armed militias into areas to rescue children, and him just asking that question of, well, what if it was your son that I was rescuing? Would that change that? But that does bring me to kind of another question that I have, which I think is kind of a problem as well, but you are addressing that. We don't know about what's happening in places like Burma. So one of the important things that you guys are doing is you are documenting stories, you are taking film, like you said, with giving some to Rambo 4, you're taking films and then you're issuing that stuff out to major news organizations to let them know what's going on in Burma. So I'm just curious your opinion here, why you think we don't know more about it. Is that the American news media is so obsessed with Trump that now that perhaps he's not going to be in office by the viewing of this thing, that they'll finally move on to other things. But why don't we know about what's going on in Burma, and how often do the things that you record and that you film, how often does that get picked up by the mainstream news media?
Well, we all have things we're interested in life, and we have our own problems. And America's a big country, and it's separated by 2 big oceans from the rest of the world, except for South America and Canada.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot going on here to look at. And I think that's normal anywhere in the world. If you go to Iraq, most of the news in Iraq is about Iraq. And that's true in Thailand, where I'm at. So I think that's normal.
Yeah.
However, we are interconnected in this world and always have been. Americans came not from here. We came from another part of the world. And my ancestors are English from way back in the early Pilgrim time, and then they're more recently from the Czech Republic, and Germans and all kinds. And people have come from all over the world to America. So we are connected, and we're connected by trade. We're connected sometimes by war. And so it's good to know about other countries, and because we're already connected with them. Also, we as Americans, just like any country, you can't solve every problem. You can't do everything, but you can. And I don't think God asks us to do everything, but he asks us to deal with what's right in front of us. And so if that's your neighbor, that's your neighbor. But as a nation, we have a bunch of other countries in front of us that we're involved in, and we can help. So I feel, to me, when I look at foreign policy, I think the most important thing for me, inquire of God. In Israel, which was a tiny nation surrounded by powerful nations, when they inquired of God, he gave them the right policies. Always.
Yes.
When they didn't, failed. So America is much more powerful and much stronger position than Israel ever was. And so we actually have it easier. But if we don't inquire of God, we're not going to get the right policy. There's too many conflicting issues. There's too many complex issues to know the right answer. But God has it, because those are all his people. And he knows how he wants us to live together. So one of our jobs is to put a light on places like Burma or Sudan or Kurdistan, northern Iraq or Syria, and be another voice back to the American public saying, this is what we see. It's up to you how you feel led to interact with it, but we're bearing witness to what we see. And in my own experience, it's been really the church in America that's been the most responsive. and the most helpful and the most caring. And we want everyone to care, but I've been really grateful for the American church that whether they contact their congressman or the congressmen themselves are believers, or they send funds, the American church makes a huge difference of good all over the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk kind of about the rest of the world. So obviously, we talked a little bit about Burma and what you're doing there. You spent some time with what's going on in Iraq too. So I'd love to hear kind of not only kind of maybe what happens in the documentary, but also what's happening presently. So I would say the vast majority, maybe not the vast majority, but a lot of people know kind of some tendential information about Iraq. And of course, it's coming back up in the news a little bit here in America because Lloyd Austin is going to be the Secretary of Defense, or at least has been the pick for Joe Biden. And so he was the one that was responsible for withdrawing soldiers in 2011 from Iraq. And then what most people would consider kind of a strategic blunder, he has to go back in 2014 and then bring soldiers back, because what actually happened in his withdrawal is he left a vacuum that was then filled up by the caliphate, and specifically by ISIS, who then starts taking over cities, and in fact takes over the second biggest city in Iraq, and then starts to head toward Baghdad. So you guys have been in Iraq. You've been there to help with people who are facing the onslaught of ISIS and militant Muslims who are fighting against people there in Iraq. So can you give us kind of the lay of the land? What is happening in Iraq right now, and what are you guys doing about it?
In Iraq, you put it well. The ISIS took over about a third of Iraq. They took over Mosul, Fallujah, Ramadi, came right up to Baghdad and took the western deserts, and also on into Syria, over half of Syria. The capital was actually in Raqqa, Syria, and the second capital be in Mosul. So we were involved first with the Kurds, helping them as they held ISIS off in 2015 and 16 until ISIS was defeated at the end of 2016 in Kurdistan, northern Iraq. And then we transitioned over to help the Iraqi army, and were with them when they defeated ISIS in Mosul by July 2017. And then by November 2017, ISIS was declared defeated in Iraq. Now they still pop up and they're attacked almost every week in Iraq, but they don't control big territory. And so while we were in with the Kurds and the Iraqi army, our main job was at the front lines, helping wounded soldiers, praying with people, helping civilians as they fled. And my wife and kids and other medics back at the casualty collection point, maybe 500 yards behind us or a mile behind us, depending on situation. We did that with the Kurds and with the Iraqis. But all through that time, we were connected with friends in Syria, mostly by a new believer who was a Muslim and became a Christian, a Syrian man named Bashir, who said, please come help our country too. And so we felt God opened the door for that in 2016. So in between the fighting, we would take little short trips into Syria. But once ISIS was pretty well defeated, at least territorially, in Iraq, then in 2018 and 19, we made many trips into Syria. And we just came out of Syria last month. So we were there for the last fall of ISIS in Baghouz. It's on the corner of Iraq and Syria by the Euphrates River. That was the very end of the physical caliphate. And we were there when the Turks and their proxies invaded northeast Syria in 2019 in October, and where I lost one of my team members right next to me, killed. So we feel like we care about the people of Iraq and the Kurds in northern Iraq, as well as the people of Syria. And we feel God has led us to help there the same way we've helped in Burma. In fact, we bring our Burma teams because they know what they're doing. We have medics from Burma, videographers, photographers, relief workers. We take them from Burma to Iraq and into Syria and work together to do the same thing, to give help, to give hope, and to give love, and also to tell the story of what we see happening. And I believe this region counts a lot. First, they're people, and they count. Second, they're right in the middle of many enemy forces. And the Kurds in particular are trying to establish a government in northern Iraq, as well as northeast Syria, that gives you freedom of religion, freedom for women, emerging democracy. This is very rare in the Middle East. So I think it's something that I think we should support it. But whether or not the U.S. supports it, which we do, the U.S. does to a degree, we need to be there.
Okay, now you may not be able to really speak to this too much, so if you can't, please don't. And if you don't feel comfortable, please don't do that. But I do have a question about the aid that has been offered in Syria. So $7 billion by the UN has been given to Syria, and then to date, something around a little over $11 billion has been given by the United States. So there's been some back and forth as to whether or not that's a good thing. So I'm just curious if maybe you've seen any of that money come to the people, since you've got boots on the ground, you're working with them, and if you've seen any of that money do anything for the people locally there in Syria.
Well, Syria is, you could divide it into different areas of control. From the Euphrates River to the east, that's controlled generally by the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's allies to the U.S. run with a Kurdish-led coalition of Kurds, Christians, and Arabs. They're on the eastern side. Because of successive Turkish invasions, there's a little strip on the top now that the Turks and their proxies, the Free Syrian Army, many of whom are ISIS, they control a swath up there. And then west of the Euphrates is mostly now controlled by Assad with Russian support, with a pocket in the northwest called Idlib and Afrin, which again is Turkish supported, many jihadis there as well. So you have this Turkish supported strip in the north and the northwest. And then you have Syria army with the Russians that control the biggest part of Syria, that's west of the Euphrates. And then you have the American allies, the Kurds and the Syrian Democratic Forces on the east. And our work has been on the east, coming in from Kurdistan, northern Iraq. So that's what we're familiar with. And the most assistance I've seen is actually from church groups in Syria and small NGOs. I'm not sure how the U.S. money is spent at all. But I'm not in that world. I don't know where they send their money or who gets it. And I have seen many church groups, American church groups, European church groups involved in the different displaced camps in northeast Syria. And I'm not familiar with how the U.S. spends their money there. I know that I've seen U.S. troops there. Now, the U.S. troops used to be all over northeast Syria, but they pulled back in October of 2019 to roughly what's called the M4 highway and the area south around the oil fields to secure those. And I'm sorry they pulled off from the Syrian border, because that allowed a Turkish invasion, which displaced over 200,000 people and killed many. But I'm really grateful the U.S. military is still there, because they stop a further invasion and they give hope to this little group of people trying to start something new in northeast Syria. But I'm really not sure how the money's spent. I'm not privy to that.
I'll just ask the question I was going to ask, because, and again, you may not feel comfortable answering this or may not have the information to answer this, but the question I really have is this, is that I think Americans are concerned that the money that's going to Syria is going to fund ISIS or militant Muslim groups out there. Is that a concern that you share as well?
I don't have that concern. I don't know where the money goes, but that would be very much against U.S. policy. And the people the Americans I do see on the ground, mostly in the South, are soldiers, and there's a few diplomats, and they definitely wouldn't want to give any money to ISIS. Yeah. And the people they're working with are totally against ISIS. In fact, they'd be dead. And so I don't think that's a concern. I think some of that concern came from earlier when the U.S. was trying to find allies in Syria and inadvertently funded what turned out to be jihadi groups, some of whom moved some of those weapons that were given them to ISIS. And so did the U.S. purposely arm ISIS? Of course not. Yeah. But did it happen? Yes. Because we didn't understand the people, we didn't vet them well enough. And my opinion is because we didn't care enough. When you care enough, you are on the ground with people and you take risks with them. You're willing to die with them, and you're making friends. You're not just trying to find who you can use and leverage to get your policies done. When you go in to be friends with people, that incurs risk, but it also develops friendship, and you find out who to help and who not to help. I think one of the weaknesses of U.S. foreign policy is we look at it as what's good for me. Well, you can never look at a friendship anywhere in the world like that. It doesn't work. Even in business, it doesn't work very well. If you just think what's just good for me, you got to think what's good for the customer. You got to think what's good for both of us. And I think that's one of the weaknesses of U.S. policy, which then turned into the U.S. inadvertently supporting the very people we didn't want to support. But it was never intentional, and it's certainly not now. And I don't see any evidence of it happening now.
Oh, that's good. Perhaps we've grown a little bit more wise in that kind of game. And of course, now that we're more familiar with ISIS and what they're doing in the area, perhaps there's greater precautions that we're taking to make sure that when we're sending that aid or sending that money, that it's going to the right places. So that being said, I just have another question for you, because I think that people will want to know about this as well. So you're not actively going into these areas as armed combatants, okay? But you do carry arms, or people carry arms to protect themselves from time to time. Now, there's this moment in the documentary that I just think is probably one of the most powerful / painful moments in the whole film. And it's when you're speaking to a family there, I think it was outside of Mosul, but in Iraq, and you're talking to them. They're so glad to see you. They go away, and they're maybe 100 yards down the road from you guys, and they come across an ISIS landmine, and they're blown up, and the people that are with them. And right there in that moment, you have this very raw, very real feeling about what you want to do to ISIS. You want to get rid of them. You want to terminate them. You want them to be ended. And that resonates with me, because I can only imagine what it was like to be sitting there talking to little children, speaking to a family, minding their own business, who were then blown up by a landmine. But then there's also something else that resonates with me, is you have this very, very tender moment later that night where you're angry, you're upset, and you take some time and you open up God's word, and immediately, without trying to, you turn to that passage where it says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And then you go back to one of your team members and you essentially apologize for the way that you responded there. Now, first of all, I think that takes Jesus. If anybody doesn't believe in miracles that's watching or listening, that response takes the strength of Christ and God inside of you to make that response, because I can only imagine how frustrated and angry you must feel trying to help these people, and then them just to be senselessly killed or attacked like that. But that does bring me to this question of kind of something that you address in the film a little bit, and I've heard you answer it multiple different times, and I just love your answer to it. So I'd love for you to share it here with us, and kind of what your stance is on being an armed combatant, or at least an armed relief worker, and when force is necessary. Kind of that balance, even, maybe this is a crude way to say it, that balance between being a soldier and a missionary, because that's two thoughts that people can't really hold together in their head. And since the whole basis of this podcast is to really help people think about challenging things and things that help us deepen our faith and just deepen our intellectual process, how have you been able to balance those two worlds? And maybe they're not as separate as we think they are, but the two worlds of being a missionary and being a soldier.
First, I'd like to say what you mentioned. When that little girl was killed, which I had a connection with that little girl, it was like my daughter was killed. And I thought, I can't live with myself if I don't do something about this.
Yeah.
And it's justice to go after these guys and hunt them down and kill them until I can't. Isn't that right? And it felt right. And I prayed, God, show me the truth of what happened today. And I was sure, along with sharing the love of Jesus and giving out food and medicine, we're going to kill as many ISIS as we can. Not because we're Superman, not because we're righteous, because it's so wrong. But the next morning, when I opened my Kindle about 5:30 in the morning before we started off with the Iraqi army again, 3 times in a row at random, I kept getting the same message. Right. Revenge belongs to God. It doesn't say there's no revenge. It says revenge belongs to God. And right then, I realized I was trying to take revenge. I said, Jesus, forgive me. I give up revenge. And it was like a 2,000-pound weight lifted off my shoulder. And what you just said was only Jesus could do it. I didn't even know I had that weight on me. I thought it was justice. But what's the difference between revenge and justice? It's love. Because love not only frees you from all that hate that comes with revenge and the spiritual damage that comes to you from revenge, it gives a chance for the perpetrator or the person that hurt you to change. And if they don't, they don't. That's their business. But then when you decide about the punishment or your reaction, it's also bound up in what's best for them, not just what's best for me, what's best for them, because I want you to change. And I think at that point, when you've been hurt badly, for me anyways, only God could change my heart.
Yeah.
I was done. But he did it. He did it. And that's one reason I follow him, because he's supernatural. It's not just a philosophy or psychology. It's something, it's spiritual, it's bigger. And I need to keep asking for that help. So we, Free Burma Rangers, go to the front lines where we're invited and sometimes find ourselves face to face with the enemy who's shooting at us. And we have a rule. We don't arm our teams. You can get your own guns. Like in the Middle East, almost everybody has a weapon. They're all over the place. In Burma, very many people don't, because there's not that many available. But we're not pacifists. We're also not there to fight. And we tell people it's up to you. You and God have to decide if you're going to fight or not. But you're not to go attack the enemy. If the enemy attacks the people you're serving and they can't run, you can't leave them. And at that moment, you got to decide, I'm not going to leave him, I'm going to die with him, or I'm going to fight back. That's up to you. You got to pray. And in my own experience, every situation is different. And, just this morning, I was praying to God about my own. I joined the Army for a reason. I liked it. I like violence. I like things that go boom. But I just prayed this morning, Lord, let me have no bloodlust. Let me have no love of violence. Take it. I give it away. I don't want that. I want to serve you first all the time, no matter what is going on. And so I had experience in the Battle of Mosul multiple times where ISIS came around the corner. One time came around the corner very close to us, 7 yards, close to 4 yards. They're shooting first. We didn't see them. Shot my friend 6 times, shot me once in the arm. And I just said, God help me. And I fought back and was able to stop them. And another time there was a liberation of a village. The Kurds did it. We're there with them. Americans did airstrike, killed ISIS, but accidentally killed a family. 8 family members died, from about 3 months old up to a 60-year-old. The whole village was out there. They're glad they were liberated, but so what's liberation? Your whole family's killed. They were furious at America. And I was an American there. American Army was not there. I was with the Kurds. And I looked, and my translator said, Dave, don't go over there, because you're an American, they're going to kill you. And I prayed about it. I thought, no, I'm an ambassador of Jesus. I have to go there. So I had an AK-47 and ammunition and all that, hand grenades. I took it all off, put the AK down, but I had a Glock pistol. I stuck it on the back of my pants, tucked my shirt over it. I don't know. I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I walked up to these guys and I began to apologize for this American airstrike. And I said, I'm sure it's a mistake. It's against our law to do it. It's against our national character to do it. Probably that pilot was a dad. And if he knew what happened, he'd be heartsick. I'm so sorry. I kept apologizing. He looked at me with hard eyes, like we'd look at someone.
Yeah.
And finally, I didn't know what to do. I just prayed and I got on my knees and I said, I am so sorry. I have nothing else I can say, but I'm sorry. It's a mistake. And I don't have time to ask my wife and kids for this permission. But right now, I give you permission to kill me. I will not fight you. I have a pistol in the back of my pants. You can pull it out and shoot me with my own pistol. And if you kill me, it doesn't bring back your 8 people. And I'm not worth your 8 people. I'm just one, but I have nothing left to give you. It's all I can give. And I just was there praying, wondering what would happen. And the older brother of the survivor of the family picks me up and he says, we cannot hate you. We cannot kill you. And we became like a family right then. That was love together. And we cried together for the loss of those kids. And so to me, I tell those 2 stories because I think sometimes there is a time to try to stop evil physically or by force. And sometimes there's a time to say, I'm not going to fight. You never have to fight, ever have to fight. Never. You can just die or you can let something happen. So to me, I want always to do what Jesus has me do at this moment, which may be different than what he has you do or someone else do. And that's how we are. So we are in the humanitarian gap between the front line where there's fighting and the big relief organizations in the back and refugee camps taking care of people. Because in that gap, there's soldiers and civilians who are killed, wounded, hungry, thirsty, scared that aren't going to get help, sometimes for days until they get back to a rear area where most non-governmental organizations work. Now, most of these organizations in the back, they do amazing work, a lot more than we do. And we depend on them. We send people to them. And so I think it's a partnership in a way, informal. But our role is the very front.
So, with all of that being said, and all the things that you're facing in these various countries, I think one of the things that I think is the most unique is that your family is doing some of this with you. Now, obviously, they're not going into conflicts where there's gunfire and that kind of thing, but your family's by your side. Do they spend most of their time in Burma? Do you guys live most of your time there?
Yes, my kids all grew up in Burma. My son Peter was 3 weeks old, born in Thailand. And then at the 3rd week, my wife carries him nursing. She's holding on my backpack. We're going at night, no lights, to avoid the Burma army in the jungle. And they've all grown up, being carried by mom and me, and then on horses and on foot. And until my daughters are 20 and 18 and just started the first year of college this year, they grew up doing that. Like, it'd be like growing up with the Oregon Trail. And then in 2014, we went to Sudan. And I remember we were going into Sudan, which was a war zone then in the Nuba Mountains. My little daughter, Suzanne, said, "Daddy, we're not just a family, we're a team." And I thought, wow, what a great thing for a dad to hear. And we were bombed every day there. And we'd hide in the caves with the people. And my daughter would run out and film. And I still remember her filming it. And my oldest daughter then was 13. Films as a plane comes in and bombs us. She films the whole thing and reports like a little reporter. The SAF, Sudanese Armed Forces, just bombed us. Here's the shell fragments. Fortunately, they didn't kill anybody. They're hiding in the cave. I thought, wow. So they've grown up with us. And as you said, we don't take them right into where there's a shooting. But they've been mortared, they've been bombed, because those things go a long way. And they've helped move wounded people, dead people. And, none of that scares them that much. And I because I've grown up in it. And I remember one of the first times they saw a badly wounded man, and I asked them to go hug him. Actually, he'd recovered, but he had no eyes, almost his whole face blown off, no hands, just stumps, and just holes where his eyes were. It looked pretty hideous. I said, he's healing now. No one's probably touched him. Go hug him. And my kids are awesome. This is when they were 5 and 8 and 10, and they kind of stiffen like your kids do when they don't want to do something. They're going to do it, but they don't like it. That kind of look on their face. I said, "Hey kids, that guy is probably someone's dad. He's certainly someone's son. And he was trying to clear a landmine the Burma Army put and blew his hands and his face off. And if that happened to me, your daddy's somewhere, would you want someone to touch me? I mean, he's alone here in this little clinic." And they teared up and they said, "Yeah, Daddy, we want someone to help you." I said, "What could happen to me?" And so then they went over and hugged this guy, and he flinched because he hadn't been touched like that. And he still had his tear ducts, and his tears came down his face. And we all cried. So we grow up together like that. And our kids, their first aunts and uncles were Karen and Shan and Gachen. These are tribes in Burma. And now they have aunts and uncles in Syria and in Iraq. So the whole family is in this together. My wife started something called the Good Life Club, which is that outreach to kids and families. And she and my kids lead that. So it's wonderful because we get to be together. And even right now, as soon as we are done here, we hope to go on another mission to Burma. So we spend our time most of the year, for the first 20 years, we're in Burma. But once our missions in Iraq and Syria started, we go back and forth between Burma, Iraq, and Syria like that, and in Sudan twice.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that too. You call from that passage in John that says that Jesus has come to give us abundant life. You call what you guys do there with your children's ministry and ministering to the people the Good Life Club. That just because abundant is sometimes a hard word to translate, but Good Life Club, and it's undeniable. You watch that documentary, you go on your website, Free Burma Rangers, and you see what you guys are doing. You guys are absolutely changing the lives of people who have been run out of their home, had their homes burned down, had their children killed right in front of their eyes, had their uncles and their aunts and just family members and friends and neighbors and people who have lost everything. You guys are going in there and bringing life to people who desperately need hope. So it's undeniable. So let's kind of round things out on a positive note. And in the how many years have you been doing this, Free Burma Rangers? 26, 27?
27 years.
27 years. Okay, so in your 27 years, I know you've got a million, but can you pick just one story that really sticks out to you that's a memorable story for you?
Well, like you said, there's many. The first thing I think of is the rescue of a little girl named Demoa, and it's in the movie as well. In fact, I wrote a book called "Do This for Love."
Oh yeah.
Free Burma Rangers, Battle of Mosul, and that's Demoa right there. It's this little girl, and you can get this on Amazon or somewhere. Anyhow, that's that little girl Demoa. I'm carrying her. This is the Battle of Mosul on June the 2nd, 2017. And what happened was, as ISIS was being defeated, first on the east side, then the west, that the fighting got more and more intense in the city. By that time, I'd been wounded 4 times. One of my team members had been killed, 2 others wounded, and a lot of my Iraqi friends killed. And ISIS started to shoot families. We came out to this one street. They'd killed 150 people, and men, women, children, babies, all shot dead, laying in the street. But there was a little girl hiding under her dead mother. We could see her across the street, kind of catty corners of 150 yards long where she was. Her dead body's right in front of us, but she was down at the end. And she was hiding under her dead mom, which is why she was not dead herself. Other kids were dead, babies, infants, people in wheelchairs shot. And we looked and thought, oh my gosh, there's a kid there. How can we get her? Because ISIS didn't just have rifles and machine guns and grenade launchers. They had anti-tank systems set up in buildings down the road in the old hospital. You couldn't get an armored vehicle down there. I remember just praying and praying. And I remember my chaplain, Paul Bradley, calling me from Thailand and praying with me and my daughter and family. Because my daughter was driving one of the armored ambulances back and forth from the front, back to the casualty collection point where my wife and my other daughter and son were. And our team was there and we prayed. And finally, I had a good relationship with the American Army. A general named General Scott Eflant, wonderful Christian man. And between him and the Iraqis, we had the Iraqis coordinate with the Americans to give us smoke. And so we got smoke, and the Iraqis gave me a tank. In fact, the first thing wouldn't give me a tank. They said, there's no way. The tank will get destroyed. We don't have any tanks left. And I said, please. And then I told the Americans, start dropping the smoke. And the Americans started dropping the smoke. I said, please, look, you can do it. And he goes, no. And I said to the Iraqi commander, if Allah told you to do it, would you do it? He goes, yes. And I grabbed his hand and I said, dear Allah, please tell this commander what to do in Isa's name, in Jesus' name. Amen. And he said, I said, what did Allah tell you? He said, 1 tank. And so we ran behind this tank and rounds, but even though there was a lot of smoke from the Americans, ISIS was shooting everything at us, RPGs, mortars, machine guns. They were bouncing off the tank. I was running behind it. It's kind of like, imagine going off the top of a roller coaster on purpose and then disconnecting the car you're in to start flying through the air. It felt like that, like we're going to all die. But there's no way to save this kid. And if I was somewhere and someone said, hey, I see your daughter and she's going to be the next one shot, I'd say, please help her. Even if you die trying, please. That's what I would want. And I prayed and just felt this is our job. If we die, we die. And if I die doing this, my wife and kids won't be ashamed. They'll be sad, but they'll know it's for love. Yeah. So we ran, 5 of us, behind this tank. And the tank is shooting and getting shot at, but we're running behind it. We get up, the tank stops, it's shooting, smoke starts to dissipate. We ask for more smoke, there's more smoke. I just pray, Jesus, help me, and ran. 2 of my team members, Sky and Ephraim, they start shooting behind the tank to give me covering fire. Monkey, my chaplain from Burma, that's his name, Monkey, he's filming. We had a Syrian refugee who's there helping us because he's a translator, although there's no talking going on. And I got this girl out and didn't get shot. I thought, wow. And then we saw there's 2 wounded men among the dead that were hiding. We got them out. And while that was happening, Ephraim, one of my guys, got shot through the leg and he fell down. We lost one of the guys. He was killed. One of the people we rescued. And Sky and Mahmoud, the Syrian guy, were helping another wounded guy. I was carrying Demoa, this little girl. And Monkey was filming and running, and we all kept running, including Ephraim, who was shot through the calf. Behind the tank is shooting, taking rounds, and we get out. And I remember holding that girl in my arms. She's got a mother's blood on her, thinking, wow, God, thank you, I'm alive, and she's alive. I'm part of life. And I told that little girl in English, which she couldn't understand, if nobody adopts you, we will. But fortunately, General Mustafa, my Iraqi army fan, found her grandmother, who was down near Baghdad. And when we met her grandmother said, the day that happened, I didn't know what was happening, but I found out later that was June the 2nd. On June the 2nd, I had a vision that my daughter was dead and my granddaughter was there, and there was all these dead bodies in Mosul somewhere, and there was a putrid, evil river running in front of them. But some man in white, a giant, beautiful man dressed in white, stepped across that chasm and rescued my granddaughter. I said, that was Jesus, and Jesus sent us. And as weak and failing as we are, we could do something. And so that little girl's named Demoa, which means tear. And she's now reunited with her grandmother. She doesn't have her mom and dad anymore, but she has a new hope with her grandmother. And when I pray, she also meets Jesus. So that story to me encapsulates what we do. And I remember Monkey, the guy for Burma on the film, he told me later, he said, Dave, I didn't want to go on that mission. I can't believe you led us on that. I kept praying to God we wouldn't do it. And then when you asked for volunteers, I told Zal, the other guy, he volunteers. And then you said, that's not volunteering. And so I had to go. I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And I was going to die and be pointless. But I finally went. And as I went and we got back and we rescued that girl, I said, God, look what you did. You took me, a person who didn't want to go, who didn't want this thing to even happen, and you let me be part of it, and you let me film it and tell the story. And as weak and as sinful as I am, I get to be part of life, real life. And I think what Monkey said is true of us all at some point. We do things that are selfish or faithless, but God still uses us. God still gives us a second chance. And so I hope one of the messages of that movie, of whatever I say, of this book, is God gives us many, many chances. Don't give up. God has not given up on us.
Yeah. And you were doing that. You were offering people a second chance at life and freedom and any number of things. So it's quite an honor to be able to speak with you today. And I have to say, for whatever it's worth, I don't think that I've ever met or known anybody that emulates Jesus as much as you and your family does. And by the way, there's zero chance that your kids are not going to be equipped for life after all of this that they've done. So thank you so much for being here today. You are a hero. You're a hero of mine, and you need to be a hero of many, many more people. So tell us how we can go and support you guys in what you're doing.
I think most importantly, pray. Pray we can get out of this quarantine. And pray that we do God's will, God's way. Prayer is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in the Free Burma Rangers, we have a website, www.freeburmarangers.org. And you can go see the movie, Free Burma Rangers, or get it on Amazon or order it from fbrmovie.org. You can get a DVD. You can get this book, Do This for Love. It may not be a great book, but it's all true. And,
sure, it's great.
And then just pray how God leads you.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you so much again for being on the show today. And go do that, everybody. Go on the website, freeburmarangers.com. Make sure that you go on Amazon, look at that documentary, send it to somebody. It'll be a blessing to you. And then make sure you get the book. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Dave.
Thank you, Reed, and God bless you and everybody who watches this and listens in Jesus' name. Amen.
Bye, everybody. Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.